France and Germany are reportedly discussing contingency trade measures, what European officials privately describe as a trade bazooka, aimed at protecting EU markets if tensions with the United States escalate further over Greenland, Iran, or broader security disputes. The alliance is under visible strain. Analysts increasingly warn that Washington could find itself isolated in a major crisis. Is this the erosion of NATO as we know it, or the beginning of a far more unstable global phase? We've published a detailed analysis on the channel. Check the related video and subscribe for ongoing updates. January 2026 may come to be remembered not only as the start of Donald Trump's second year back in office, but as a moment when long-standing assumptions about the post-1945 international order were seriously challenged. What we are witnessing is not collapse overnight, but mounting pressure across the global system. For decades, the U.S. president was widely viewed as the automatic leader of the free world. Today, that perception is increasingly debated. Over the past month, a series of extraordinary developments have heightened global concern. U.S. forces conducted a high-profile operation in Venezuela that resulted in the detention of its leader. The president publicly reiterated interest in Greenland, framing it as a strategic issue, and recent reports confirm significant U.S. naval deployments toward the Persian Gulf, moves that have sparked anxiety among allies and analysts alike. Yet the most striking development is not American assertiveness. It is the reaction from partners. For the first time in decades, as Washington adopts a more confrontational posture, traditional allies are responding with caution rather than alignment. Many are quietly preparing contingency plans for scenarios in which U.S. leadership becomes less predictable. This video examines what analysts are calling the January 2026 crisis. To understand why world leaders appear increasingly distant from the White House, we need to look back several weeks. On January 3rd, global media was dominated by dramatic footage from Caracas following a rapid U.S. military operation. American officials later confirmed that Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro had been detained and transferred to U.S. custody on criminal charges. The administration announced plans for an interim governing framework and emphasized securing energy supply interests. Supporters praised the move as decisive. Critics described it as a unilateral intervention with serious diplomatic consequences. Across Latin America, governments expressed alarm. Several recalled ambassadors or issued sharp statements. In Europe, the reaction was more subdued but deeply uneasy. If Washington was willing to act this decisively in South America, leaders asked what constraints still applied elsewhere. That unease intensified as attention shifted northward. Trump revived the Greenland issue, framing it as a strategic necessity in the Arctic competition with China. Danish officials rejected any discussion of a transfer. Subsequent rhetoric, including references to tariffs, raised tensions further. While no formal action followed, the episode shook confidence within NATO. Behind closed doors, European leaders began accelerating discussions about strategic autonomy. According to reporting from Brussels, the European Commission has been preparing potential retaliatory trade tools, not as punishment, but as insurance. French officials have been blunt. Europe cannot assume permanent alignment with U.S. policy choices. The shift became visible at the World Economic Forum in Davos. Trump's speech challenged the foundations of the rules-based international system and defended recent U.S. actions. Some delegates reportedly left early, a move widely interpreted as symbolic disengagement rather than protest. Meanwhile, China's delegation remained silent, allowing divisions within the Western Bloc to speak for themselves. As of January 29, 2026, tensions remain elevated. The U.S. has issued strong warnings to Iran regarding its nuclear program, while increasing its military presence in the region. Satellite imagery confirms major naval movements, though officials emphasize deterrence rather than imminent action. European governments have urged de-escalation, warning that conflict could destabilize energy markets and the global economy. Iran, for its part, has issued its own warnings, particularly regarding shipping routes in the Persian Gulf. The situation remains fluid, with no confirmed military engagement. What emerges is a scenario few would have predicted years ago. The United States is asserting power abroad while simultaneously straining relations with allies. World leaders have not stepped back out of hostility, but out of risk management. Many now view unpredictability, rather than strength or weakness, as the central concern. Europe is accelerating independent defense and trade planning. Latin America is diversifying economic ties. NATO remains intact institutionally, but unity is under pressure. If a major conflict were to erupt, analysts warn the U.S. could face it with limited allied support. Deadlines loom. Markets are watching. Diplomacy is tense. Trump promised disruption. By early 2026, disruption is undeniable. The open question is not whether the global system is changing, but whether cooperation can be rebuilt before the next crisis forces a reckoning. We are monitoring developments in the Persian Gulf and Europe closely. Subscribe for real-time analysis as events unfold. History is moving quickly. Stay alert.